Hey guys, so your topic today is chapter 4 in your text, which has to do with some odds and ends with how the government interacts with the economy. So we've looked a little bit at the fact that, we have a market system. There's also another type of system called a command system where the government controls everything. And specifically, we're going to look at a few ways that the government interacts with our economy here in our market system. So I'm going to go through all of these notes in a video just to explain them. And then if you want to go back through, my recommendation would be that you copy them down. Research shows you remember it better when you do. But you also have access to the Google Slides presentation. And at the very end, there's a short video that kind of illustrates some of the things that we're going to talk about. So you'll want to go back to the Google Slides presentation and watch that when we're done here. So again, the government does play a role in our economy, even though we're mostly free market. And a few things that our government does is number one, to provide a legal structure. So the Constitution does address the economy in it. It was mainly a political document, how to politically set up the country. But there are some things that are protected in the Constitution that basically set up our economy to function the way it does and also set the stage for the unparalleled prosperity that Americans have enjoyed over the years. So the first thing has to do with protecting contracts. So we do have the rule of law. We do provide people with private property, and the government does enforce those contracts that you enter into. The reason this is important from an economic perspective is that it allows people to take measured risks when it comes to the economy. So, if it was not for contract language and the government protecting contracts, you may see fewer people willing to invest in business ventures because they don't want to risk losing their investment. As I mentioned, the government also enforces laws, particularly in relation to the economy. The government manages our financial system, so they make sure that our currency is stable, holding its value, that there's adequate currency in circulation, although we did have some problems with that in our most recent pandemic. And then the government also maintains competitions in markets. So it's illegal to form a monopoly by buying out your competition. That's called a trust. The government maintains that competition in markets. Another thing that the government does is it redistributes income. In other words, it takes money from one taxpayer and pays it to another taxpayer. There's a couple different ways that this happens. First of all, the government provides a safety net for people in the United States. Transfer payments, where you take tax revenue from one taxpayer and transfer it to another, account for more expenditures than any other category in the American federal budget. So this would include things like SNAP or food stamps, like Section 8 housing, like welfare benefits, unemployment, Social Security, etc. The government also raises revenue, so it pays for those transfer payments and other discretionary spending through taxation. So if you have a job, you pay federal income tax, and there are other taxes that are levied by the federal government as well. The government also engages in market interventions, so trying to encourage certain types of economic activity with government policy. For example, during President Obama's administration, figuring out new ways to provide green energy was a big priority of that administration. So his administration subsidized green energy. So if you wanted to start your own business dealing with green energy, you could get cash from the government to help you do that. The government will also sometimes levy tariffs. President Trump's administration has done this to make American goods less expensive than foreign goods, to help American producers by creating higher priced foreign option. So within the framework of how the government interacts with the economy, there are two types of goods that you should know. The first type of goods are called private goods. These are goods that are produced in markets by firms, so private individuals or private businesses. They're offered for sale, so they cost money, they're not free, and they're characterized by rivalry and excludability, meaning that anytime someone partakes of one of these goods, it reduces the amount of goods that are available for everyone else. That's what we mean by rivalry. Excludability means that people can be excluded from partaking in these private goods, usually due to price. So, more expensive products will have fewer people that can afford to utilize them. Less expensive products will be available to more people, and certain people could be excluded altogether if they're not willing to pay any price or able to pay any price for that good. On the other hand, you have public goods. Public goods are offered for free by the government. Free is in quotation marks here because nothing is really free. There is no such thing as a free lunch. It may be free to you, but it's not free to everyone. But what we mean by offered for free is that it's included in the government. Characteristics include non-rivalry, non-excludability, and therefore we have a free rider problem. So non-rivalry means when you partake of this item, this good or service, it doesn't reduce the amount that's available for everyone else. Non-excludability means you can't be excluded from partaking in this public good. A free rider problem arises when you have people who are not paying taxes that help support the public goods, but are able to partake of the public goods. So for example, fireworks display that's put on by a city government would be an example of a public good. It's not rivalrous, so if I'm looking at the fireworks display, that doesn't keep anyone else from being able to also watch the fireworks display. It's non-excludable, which means that I can't be excluded from looking at the fireworks. They might be able to keep me out of Rice Field if I don't want to pay to get in, but I can stand in the parking lot or on Goshen Avenue and still see the fireworks. So that's what we mean by non-rivalry and non-excludability. Now, I don't technically live in Elkhart City, but Elkhart City pays for those fireworks. So if I don't pay to go into that stadium, I'm technically a free rider. I'm enjoying the benefit of seeing fireworks, but I'm not contributing to the cost of that because I don't live in the city and therefore I don't pay city taxes. Now, fireworks are sort of a minor thing when it comes to a free rider problem. It can be a bigger problem if you have more people that are partaking of public goods than are actually paying for public goods. That's when you end up with situations where public goods become insolvent, where the government can no longer be able to provide them because so many people are partaking of them, but only a handful of people actually pay for them. So the government also acts to manage externalities. So externalities are unintended costs or benefits of economic activity. So anytime that we engage in economic activity, there are these unintended consequences that occur, and they could be positive consequences, pardon the bell, or they could be negative consequences. For example, when we're talking about negative consequences, these would be situations where the social cost of the activity actually outweighs the private benefit. So, for example, a business that is producing something that generates pollution gets a lot of benefit from whatever that economic activity is. And the cost of the pollution doesn't really affect the individual business that much because it's just going into the air, going into the water, and then dissipating into, all of these publicly held resources. So if I'm the business owner, I'm not feeling the pain of the pollution, even though society is feeling the pain of the pollution. So what the government can do is it can enact certain policy to try to make sure the costs and benefits are balanced. So they may impose a tax, for example, on a private company that produces pollution. And if that company can lower their emissions to a certain level, then they may be exempt from that tax. So it gives them an incentive to lower their emissions, find ways that to stop polluting so much, and that helps balance the benefit and cost. It keeps the social cost from outweighing the private benefit. When that private company has to pay a tax, that lowers the amount that they benefit and encourages them to produce less pollution. A positive externality would be one where the social benefit outweighs the private cost. An example would be education. So there are many social benefits to providing a public education. You have a better educated population, people that are able to be self-sufficient, people are less likely to go to prison. In fact, we even see we see birth rates come down, we see healthy births increase, we see lifespan increase when a population is better educated. So, all kinds of social benefits for education, but education costs money. And we can all agree that education is a great thing, but if we're not willing to put our money where our mouth is and fund a public education, the private cost becomes a barrier for many families. If everyone had to pay for private tuition for education, education would be something that's split between the haves and have-nots, people that can afford to pay the private tuition and people that can't. So over 100 years ago in our nation, we decided public education was important enough that we needed to provide it to take that cost away from individuals, but still provide that social benefit. So both of those would be examples of the government managing externalities. So there's a couple different ways that the government can intervene, and I mentioned this a little bit on the last slide. First of all, the government can correct negative externalities like pollution by enacting either direct controls or specific taxes. So the government could say you're not allowed to pollute any more than X particles per million, or we're going to shut you down, or you're going to pay a fee, or things like that. The other issue would be taxes, taxing people that pollute more, giving tax breaks to people that pollute less. You can correct positive externalities by providing subsidies or just providing the item by the government altogether. So subsidies, an example of that would be with the green energy that we talked about before. Certainly, there's a great social benefit of providing green energy, but there's a pretty high private cost. So if the government provides subsidies, that helps investors want to take that risk in order to put that business together. Or the government could just provide those goods and services like public education. Another example would be a forthcoming COVID-19 vaccine. So at the point that there is a safe vaccine, the government has already said they're providing it free of charge because there's a huge social benefit to having people that are immune to COVID-19. But many people might not be able to pay the cost that it would cost them to pay for that shot out of pocket. And so therefore, the government provides it to encourage people to get it. All right, so the last thing I want you to do is go back to the Google Slides presentation. There is a little video, it's about 5 minutes long on the last slide. Watch that video to see an explanation of something called the tragedy of the commons and how it's related to externalities. And I will see you back in class real soon.